Alone in his cell, Frederick Anderson, a proud commander of the Army military forces, could only groan in pain and frustration as the bindings on his body prevented him from moving. Meanwhile, the occasional electric shocks that coursed through his body forced him to stay awake for far longer than even his implants allowed him to without repercussions. Outside of his cell, 2 Royal Marines kept a silent but unflinching guard over him while cameras pointed from multiple angles and directions focused on even his breathing. Finally, he was disconnected and isolated, unable to access the exalted virtues network or receive any aid whatsoever. He was tired, and his body showcased a few bruises, but mentally he was growing weaker by the moment. Milcades, captain of the Royal Marines aboard the ship, had spent his time divided between interrogating him and the dreadful alien kept away in another cell. It was easy to deduce that the captain had achieved a breakthrough with the Drazen, as his efforts at interrogation and intrusion within his mind were far more intense and focused than in any day prior. Frederick didn't regret his betrayal. House Anderson had been loyal to the Astors, and for what? To be overlooked and set aside in favor of their favorite servants and their damn Winfield dogs. As one of the potential heirs of House Anderson, he was willing to do anything to ensure not only his place as the new head of the house, but to shower his house with riches, favors, power, and prestige. But he had been tricked, and now he was a prisoner and seen as a lowly traitor. The Council of Nobles be damned. Damn Ionati and Emerald for their inaction. Duke Cornelius should have been recognized as regent. He should be the rightful prince, not that weakling pretender. Frederick thought angrily as he glared at the Royal Marines before an electric shock made him groan loudly through his masked mouth. When the shock ended, he closed his eyes and breathed heavily through his nostrils. Only a few seconds later, he felt a sharp, intense pain at the base of his skull, as if something had just stabbed him. The pain lasted for a fraction of a second, and then he heard a voice inside his mind.
"Can you hear me, Frederick?"
A polite, measured, garbled voice called. Frederick was befuddled for a full second before anger swelled inside him. "Jade! How is this possible? I was cut off from access and inside this damn cell. No one should be able to contact me."
To answer your question, it wasn't easy. No matter what happens, don't make any sudden reactions. Keep doing whatever you are doing, or the watchdogs will know something's wrong with you, Frederick. I'm afraid our time is limited,
the voice indicated.
I'll cut right to the chase. What have you revealed so far?
Frederick felt indignation beat against his chest at being addressed so bluntly. "You may have the favor of the Castons and that of Hadrian Tigan, but you are still beneath me, Jade. You're as false as your name, as false as the pretender that has claimed the principality's throne," he spat back angrily.
"Your failure is your own, Frederick,"
Jade replied. "My own? It was you who told me that the damned parasite-ridden commoner had turned to our cause. He was meant to be a sacrificial lamb to eradicate the pretender in one fell swoop. My failure is your failure, failure born from incompetence. Thanks to you, we've been exposed and destroyed. We had the chance to end this conflict and gain the favor of his Lord Regent, and you failed, Jade," Frederick countered, wishing nothing more than to be able to strangle Jade with his own hands.
"Did I tell you to expose yourself in such an idiotic fashion? Did I not warn you that you had to remain hidden?"
Jade replied, their tone unchanged and garbled.
"Now answer my question. What have you revealed?"
"Nothing. I've not been broken. I've endured interrogation," Frederick replied, trying to convey his sneer through the link. "Your failure was grave, but at least you've been able to remain truly loyal to his Lord Regent, for now." "How much longer until you crack or until they start torturing you?" Jade asked. Frederick wanted to scoff at that notion. "Even the pretender isn't that stupid. If I am tortured or worse, killed, then House Anderson's position would be compromised. The insult and outrage of having a potential heir damaged beyond what's acceptable for a noble of my stature would be felt. I am untouchable." "He wouldn't dare," he replied.
"Don't be so sure. These are trying times for everyone, Frederick. The false prince may not be willing to incur the ire of House Anderson by breaking noble tradition and etiquette, but what about the damn wench? You know how ruthless she can be. She could convince the pretender to torture you, and then what? Everything you know will be for him to know,"
Jade explained and paused for a moment.
"Although that may not be needed at all. The Pretender has already broken the rules that formed and maintained the Principality's social structure when he elevated a mere commoner to the rank of lieutenant. That mongrel showcased some measure of talent and above-average capabilities. He could have been a useful tool.
I can't comprehend how he was able to trick you, Jade, Frederick replied dryly. I will admit that I underestimated him. I thought I had convinced him to join our cause.
Frederick, you don't know this, but the damn Pretender elevated that treacherous bastard to nobility. He's a damned knight banneret of House Astor now,
said Jade, voice forever unchanging. If he could, the ex-commander would have spat in pure disbelief and indignation at the mere prospect of that becoming a reality. Surely you jest. A nobody commoner that used to haul trash less than a month ago? Him? A knight banneret?
Thanks to your stupidity, we lost the QEC in that attempt to throw the loyalist dogs to the Pretender off balance. It has crippled us, but not entirely. The few of us that remain will continue operations from the shadows for the time being. Frederick, I believe that this Wyatt Staples may not be a mere commoner at all.
Jade pondered. Have you not seen his behavior? His actions? Not to mention his lack of significant implants and the way he carries himself. It is obvious he is a commoner as lowly as commoners are. How could he be anything else? Asked Frederick with contempt dripping from his tone.
Because Frederick, when I interviewed him, I believe every damn word he said to me, Jade began. I never once detected trickery or deceit coming from him. Every word was honest and unveiled. How is it possible for a mere commoner to be able to lie in such a way? I'm an intelligence officer trained to detect subtle changes in people when they lie. Commoners are the easiest, and yet Wyatt Staples never lied. No, he lied. He lied to my face, and I believed him entirely. What sort of hellish training did he go through to achieve such mastery?
That's not possible. It shouldn't be possible, the bound man replied, flabbergasted.
The false prince revealed during his elevation and ennoblement that Wyatt Staples had been acting under his orders. Do you understand what that means?
Jade asked. Frederick gulped. It would mean that the Pretender relied on the aid of a commoner to make us surface. And it worked. But no royal would ever rely on a mere commoner in any capacity other than to have them die in their name, he reasoned.
Precisely. Without access to the records of the Third Fleet, there's no way to know if any information regarding him is real or not. Worst of all, we have precious little information as it stands. It is clear that he does not have a son or any offspring, for that matter. In fact, we know nothing of him except for what was in the network, and his files have been put under lock. Curious, isn't it?
Jade let out a laugh.
Not to mention the wench has shown great interest in a mere commoner from the moment he saved her. Such a convenient location for a compost hauler to appear.
Frederick felt a rumble in his chest. Do you think that Wyatt Staples is not a commoner after all?
Nothing adds up for him to be a commoner, Frederick. Think about it. Redford took him under his wing and made efforts to mentor and protect him. The Astor wench and her blue-haired demon show favoritism over him. The false prince promoted him to lieutenant on the spot after rescuing his whore of a sister. No, I believe this has been a long-term plan of theirs,
Jade explained. That's absurd. Yet at the same time, it makes sense. I thought Wyatt Staples was just a pet Princess Clara picked up for rescuing her life. But now, I'm seeing the clear picture. Such talent as a pilot, able to find a new solution to ZTK 990, and his performance against the Drazen, the way Juliana defended his position, could it be possible that this Wyatt Staples has always been an undercover agent? Perhaps a Royal Marine trainee in disguise? Frederick asked with mounting dread.
I highly doubt that he's a Royal Marine trainee. He'd be heavily augmented otherwise. But an undercover agent? That I believe. No commoner would ever be able to showcase such natural talent. Until I can contact Admiral Cornelius or the Third Fleet, everything will be left to speculation. But the secrecy around the man itself speaks volumes of his position. I hate working with so little information, but everything points out that Wyatt Staples, if that is his real name, has been working for the Astors for a long time and has been dutifully rewarded. Likely his ennoblement and elevation to a knight banneret is another trick or the payment for services rendered.
Jade groaned.
Be that as it may, he's out of my reach. For now.
Why? The ex-commander asked, concerned.
The Aster trollop proved her cunning. She claimed the idiotically named Nornavio as her flagship. Personnel was carefully selected to serve in it, and none in our group nor any of my contacts were selected. The ship is also completely locked out from the network and only transmits directly to that worthless Damien, the Callan bastard, or the pretender prince. We are blind to the future movements of the princess. When we arrive at Matcha, I shall try to sway some of the personnel they picked from Woodshaft. Other than that, there's nothing I can do, and soon we will lose sight of one unworthy royal.
Jade explained. Frederick was certain that Jade was frustrated beyond measure, but thanks to the monotone garble, whatever emotions he or she was feeling were masked. Despite everything that happened, he still didn't know who Jade was, but intelligence officers were secretive most of the time. "You should have killed him then," he replied, setting his thoughts aside. "He fooled us all?"
Yes, I should have. I underestimated him and fell for his trickery. Now we are paying the price for such failure.
Jade agreed. "Then, Jade, what are we to do now? Will you attempt to rescue me?" Frederick asked.
Even if I wanted to, Frederick, I don't have the manpower to make any such attempt. Not to mention that the damned royal watchdogs would tear us to pieces before we even make it to your cell. I'm afraid I can't do much for you. Ah, it's nearly done,
Jade exclaimed. "Jade, you miserable rat! What's nearly done? Answer me, you disgraceful wretch. Why did you contact me if not to rescue me?" the bound man demanded angrily.
I've been tasked with a most important mission, and unlike you, I plan to be successful in my endeavors, Frederick. I take no pleasure in this, and I must confess I am somewhat envious of your position. Alas, this glory belongs to you and you alone. I needed time to get inside you, literally. Thank you for your cooperation, Commander,
replied Jade. "I am your superior. I won't be able to hold for more than 2 or 3 more days at this rate. You must rescue me whatever the cost," Frederick ordered, heart beating hard and fast against his chest as a wave of dread began to stir within him.
I'm afraid I cannot do that, Frederick. What you know must not reach the hands of the false prince. Victory demands sacrifices of us all. Take heed and solace, for you shall make the Lord Regent proud and bring great honor upon House Anderson,
Jade replied. "Sacrifice? Proud? Honor? What nonsense are you talking about? I'm Frederick Anderson, potential heir of House Anderson, son of Patrick Anderson. I demand that you free me from this confinement," he protested as he grew agitated. The Royal Marines watching him took notice of it and no doubt asked for orders. "Hurry, now!"
I am terribly sorry, Frederick. Rescue is beyond my capabilities, but I can give you honor beyond measure. You shall be forever remembered as a great hero of the Principality. In the name of Lord Regent Cornelius Draymore, I thank you for your valiant sacrifice and your outstanding valor. Now die in service to his Lord Regent, and may your failures be forgotten,"
Jade stated, and the link died. Frederick screamed in outrage. His eyes widened as far as they could go when he felt a hot, searing sensation spread from the back of his head like the tendrils of a creeper vine wrapping around his cranium. Then, all thoughts left his mind, and Frederick Anderson died, without glory to his name, his body going limp as blood trickled out of every available orifice. Nornavio, Princess Clara's quarters. No matter how hard he tried to, Wyatt couldn't stop his lips from curling up into a small smile as his fingers and hands moved the knitting needles he was holding with familiar ease. There was no hurry to his motions as the strands of yarn were put together to form a pattern. As his hands moved, his gaze traveled to the 2 women he was accompanying. The quarters of his princess had once belonged to Samuel Cayston and had been overhauled and modified to fit the standards of a royal princess. Compared to her old quarters back in the Exalted Virtue, her new room was bigger, more elegant, and beautifully decorated with paintings, a few plants, and other pieces of furniture. And yet, the welcoming ambiance remained the same just by her presence alone. To his right, Clara was relaxed, her hands moving faster than his own, and with great expertise while humming some odd melody he didn't know. To his left, Cynthia's stoic expression returned, but her movements were clunky and stiff. Her right eye twitched every time she made a mistake, which was often, and was forced to undo several knots to fix it and continue from there. Even though she's made my relationship with the floor a rather intimate one, seeing her struggle like that is both hilarious and a little sad. She's trying, but she's not that good at it. Clara wasn't exaggerating, Wyatt thought. as he stopped for a moment to reach for his teacup and take a sip from it, sighing in satisfaction at the sweet, sweet flavor of the beverage. He was half tempted to reach for another cookie, but he had eaten more than the two women, and he didn't want them to think he was as glutinous as a Clixol. Instead, he reached down to the small bag he had used to carry his knitting set and pulled out a jar half filled with apple-sized, dried-up green, orange, and lavender-colored insects. He pulled one out and bit into it with a satisfying crunch. The rich, sour but satisfying flavor of the Lakoa filled his mouth, and he munched on it happily. "How can you eat that?" Cynthia asked all of a sudden, her eyes fixed on the Lakoa while her expression remained neutral. Wyatt munched faster, and then swallowed. "They're just bugs. Every commoner in Volantis eats them," he explained. "They're a bit sour at first, but they're meaty and you get used to the flavor quickly, pretty filling too. You should try one," he offered sincerely. "Thank you, Wyatt, but no thank you, I don't like bugs," Cynthia replied. Clara giggled. The great Cynthia Winfield defeated by a simple Lakoa, was it? Wyatt nodded while Cynthia gave her a deadpanned look. "Oh, you know I jest, Cynthia, but now that the window has opened, I can finally ask you, Wyatt, what do people in Volantis usually eat? I remember you mentioned an avian creature named Clixal?" "Well, yeah. We can eat everything that can be cultivated, hunted, grown, or traded, really," he replied with a shrug. "Mushrooms, Clixal meat, and eggs, several types of fruits and vegetables, like apples, carrots, tomatoes, and algae are the most common. Then I would say fish, produced from animals, and of course the Lachoa," he said, raising his half-eaten bug. "We also eat other bugs like the Rintal and the Wolkama, but those aren't as good in my opinion. Oh, and smoked meats from various animals and bread," he explained before eating the rest of his Lakoa and wiping his fingers on his handkerchief. "That sounds rather lackluster," Clara replied. "What about baked goods and spices?" "Almost everything that's imported are consumer goods and luxury items. For spices, we stick to what can be found on Volantis. I've heard stories about baked sweets, but until I was at the academy, I never saw one before. I never ate one, though. Exclusive to nobles, of course," he said without resentment, but his voice transmitted a longing that wasn't there before. "Had I known they were so delicious, I would have risked getting expelled for a sample." "There aren't sugary confections in your homeworld?" Cynthia asked, taken aback while Clara's expression was one of shock, as if someone had slapped her across the face. "The most powerful nobles have them," he replied without hesitation. "Don't misunderstand me. There are sweet things in Volantis, like the processed sap of certain trees and the byproducts certain insects make, like the Lakoa. They burrow underground and form colonies, hunting down worms and other insects and eating mushrooms and roots. They produce a sweet green slime we call goonie, though comparing it to these baked goods is unfair," he finished with a chuckle while his hands continued to work. "Until I tasted them, I didn't know what sugar, chocolate, or grapes were," Clara declared. "Then again, I'm not sure if I could miss something I've never had." The princess hummed for a moment and set her tools on the table. "Wyatt, may I please have a Lakoa?" "Clara," Cynthia muttered with barely concealed disgust. Wyatt raised an eyebrow in confusion before looking down at his jar, then at Clara earnest, expecting face. "They're crunchy and sour at first. Just keep chewing and you'll get used to the flavor, Clara." "Wyatt!" Cynthia exclaimed, now properly mortified as he offered the opened jar to her princess and watched as Clara pulled out a bug. Then, to her horror, she watched her best friend examine the bug with mild apprehension before opening her mouth. She then bit off the head of the Lakoa, producing a loud crunch followed by audible munching. Wyatt grimaced when Clara's expression shifted to one of disgust, but she didn't spit out the Lakoa. After a few seconds, her expression shifted from disgust to one of intrigue and then to one of mild satisfaction. The princess swallowed after chewing on it for half a minute, and he leaned forth, intrigued by her reactions. That wasn't at all what I was expecting," Clara confessed. "It tastes like dried meat mixed with raw almonds and the saltines of a pistachio. But the more I chewed on it, the better the flavor became. I wouldn't call it a delicacy, but it isn't terrible," she said before taking another bite. Cynthia visibly shuddered. "Your curiosity is a curse I must endure, Clara," she declared dryly while her friend gave her a very smug look. With another shudder, she set her knitting needles aside and extended a hand to Wyatt. Oh, this will be fun to see, Wyatt thought with interest as he handed her the jar. Cynthia picked a LaChoa and looked at it disgustingly for several seconds until she took in a deep breath and ate half of it in a single go. The pilot had to bite his tongue to prevent himself from laughing when Cynthia's eyes went wide and the color left her face for several seconds. Regardless of her feelings, she began to chew, and much to his surprise, her disgust began to diminish, and soon her expression was one of curiosity and then surprise. He spoke up only after she swallowed. "Is everything okay, Cynthia?" "It is not bad," Cynthia confessed, her disgust well and truly removed. "I've eaten bugs before, and they were all disgusting in every sense of the word, smell, appearance, and taste, but this LaChoa is surprisingly good after the first moments, not to mention I detect an outstanding amount of protein value and other vitamins and trace minerals within it." "Wyatt, are these LaChoa hard to come by?" "Not at all," he replied, surprised by her analysis. "The only thing more abundant than the Clixol are the LaChoa. In fact, almost everything eats LaChoa, and they multiply fast and grow quickly. There are entire farms dedicated to LaChoa production, both the LaChoa themselves and their goonie. Easy to produce, highly nutritious, and abundant in numbers. An ideal source of food," Clara concluded after swallowing the last of her LaChoa. "Huh, I never thought of the LaChoa that way. Now that mention it, Clara, it makes sense why they're so easy to come by," Wyatt rationalized and chuckled to himself. "Uriel gifted me an entire load of dried LaChoa. I won't be able to eat them all myself. As enlightening as this experience has been, I don't think I will sample another LaChoa," Clara said gently. "It didn't taste bad, but I will not trade it for my usual meals and confections." Wyatt nodded. "They are an acquired taste," he admitted, and turned to Cynthia, who, to his surprise, ate the rest of her LaChoa without any issue whatsoever. "I thought you didn't like bugs." "I can make an exception for these LaChoa. Now that I have tasted them, I only see them as a source of nourishment. Their appearance is no longer a concern to me, but I will not partake in them regularly either," she said, looking away. "Like I said, they are an acquired taste. Not everyone likes them even back home. My little brother, Wham, loves them," Wyatt explained as both women picked their knitting tools once more. "Speaking of your family, Wyatt, I've been meaning to ask you about your naming conventions. What are the names of your mother and father?" Clara asked gently. Wyatt's lips curled up instantly. "My mom's name is Winona and my dad's name is Wirt. Winona and Wirt Staples. Winona, Wirt, Wham, Weskel, Wyatt," Cynthia enunciated. "Not to mention the names of your childhood friends and several others you've mentioned so far." She paused for a moment and gave Wyatt an apologetic look. "Forgive me if mentioning them made you uncomfortable, Wyatt." "They're dead, Cynthia. You didn't insult them or anything." "There's nothing to forgive," Wyatt replied sincerely. "I made my peace with their deaths a long time ago," Cynthia nodded once, offering the pilot a momentary earnest smile. Then he turned to Clara. "Is something the matter, Clara?" The princess shook her head once. "I'm just curious as to why all your names start with a W." "Ah!" Wyatt exclaimed in understanding. "Is that all? I guess it must be strange to others. In Volantis, the vast majority of commoner names start with a W. Around 2/3 of the commoner population when I left for the academy, and I doubt that number changed much." "Oh, so it's due to a cultural reason?" Clara asked with a gentle smile. "I guess. I never put much thought into it. Funnily enough, in contrast, nobles never have names starting with a W, since that's just for commoners. And while it doesn't happen often, when a high-ranking commoner buys a knight title, they almost always change their name if it starts with a W. Silly traditions and all that, I believe," Wyatt explained with humor in his voice. Clara and Cynthia exchanged a second long glance before the blue-haired woman continued. "And now you're a knight banneret, Wyatt. Are you planning on changing your name?" "No," he stated flatly. "We're not in Volantis. I like my name. It's the name my parents gave me." The two women shared another quick glance and nodded. The trio resumed their knitting session in an enjoyable silence for several minutes until Cynthia let out a groan and smacked her needles on the table. "Clara, I request that—" "Denied," Clara interrupted her friend before she could finish her petition. "Today we shall relax. You can continue training tomorrow. If you continue to pummel Wyatt into the floor, you'll dent my ship, Cynthia. Let the man rest." Thank you, my princess. Thank you. My back, stomach, and bones thank you immensely, Wyatt thought, as his body shuddered, remembering the hellish training he was put under. Knowing that his training was going to get harder only made him appreciate his brief moments of respite all the more. Defeated by string, knitting needles, and yarn? Disgraceful. At least this isn't as disastrous as trying to do embroidery, Cynthia mourned before picking up her knitting needles again. Say, Wyatt, what are you making? A scarf, he replied, stopping for a moment and raised his arms to reveal a nearly meter-long khaki-colored scarf in the making. He chuckled, embarrassed. It's been a while since I last put my skills to use, so I want to start with something easy. Nothing too complicated. Simple yet functional. Good choice, Wyatt. Your mother taught you well, Clara praised as she presented a blue, violet, and pink square. I'm making a blanket, and I'm near the center point. I wonder what I'll put in it. A fighter? The Nornavio? Perhaps a cute cat? She said eagerly. What's a cat? Wyatt questioned, and for a moment focused his attention on the blonde princess. Seeing her smiling like that, the way her cheeks were lightly blushing, and being at peace filled him with a sensation of calmness that was hard for him to describe. He had felt it before. It was the reason he had been so open to them in the first place. His gaze shifted to Cynthia, who was again struggling with her knitting, and he saw her flaws easily. But despite her obvious frustration, Clara didn't aid her friend. May I help you? He asked, and was surprised that the words left his mouth before he could think about it. However, Cynthia shook her head dismissingly. Your offer is appreciated, Wyatt, but a lady must gain her courtly skills on her own. To receive more than a simple instruction from another lady disgraces oneself, Cynthia explained before being forced to undo another knot she made by mistake. Wyatt blinked, and his mind went blank for a moment. Why are nobles so obsessed with honor, glory, and all those useless things? Is it because of tradition or something? Does it work differently for noble ladies of higher stature? Or is it just because of pride? There's no shame in asking for help when you need it, he thought, and opened his mouth. But just when he was about to apologize, something Cynthia said clicked in his mind. Cynthia, I'm not a lady. Everyone stopped and the room turned silent. Cynthia stopped and slowly turned to him as if she'd been sucker punched. After several long moments, Cynthia tilted her head slightly. You're correct. You're not a lady. She blinked quickly and shook her head a second later. It matters not, Wyatt. The spirit of the tradition can't be so easily breached just because— Excellent, Clara proclaimed, suddenly interjecting. Since Wyatt is a man, he can help you improve your knitting skills, Cynthia. Wyatt, as your princess, I command you to give knitting lessons to my bodyguard, Cynthia Winfield, at once. Isn't this just oh so wonderful? You're training each other now. There was a moment of silence before Wyatt let out a hearty chuckle. I obey, Wyatt replied with a polite smile and looked over at Cynthia, asking her if it was all right. She met his gaze with her vibrant blue eyes and blinked once in approval, much to her shame and dismay. Oh, and you're forbidden from replying with I obey ever again, Clara added. I've never liked it, and I'm not about to have you say it whenever I issue a command now that you're a noble, Wyatt. Understand, Wyatt replied as cold sweat formed on his brow, but the moment passed quickly. Taking a deep breath, he turned to Cynthia at the same time Clara returned to her knitting. So, what can I help you with, Cynthia? I don't know, she began. I'm not adept at asking or receiving help. Can you offer me any advice whatsoever? Wyatt hummed and tapped his chin with the tip of a needle. Great. I don't know what to do. I've seen enough of her mistakes to know she's bad at it, but nothing that some practice can't help. She won't be great at it, but perhaps I can help her enjoy her time. But where to begin? What would Mom do in my place? Probably pinching her cheeks and telling her what to do isn't a good idea, or is it? Telling a high-ranking noble what to do feels wrong, but maybe I can show her. Reaching a decision, he grabbed his seat and fully turned to face a puzzled Cynthia, while Clara glanced at them curiously. Let's start with the basics. Follow the movements of my hands and fingers. I'll do it slowly, and when you feel confident to imitate me, do so, he offered nervously. If that's okay with you, Cynthia? As I am your teacher in the arena, you are my teacher here. I will follow your commands. Sir Wyatt, she replied with a barely perceptible cheeky smirk. In that case, let's begin, he replied gently. The following 20 or so minutes passed in relative silence as Cynthia paid close attention to Wyatt's movements, until she felt secure enough to imitate him. She fumbled several times, but whenever a mistake happened, it was easily spotted and eluded faster than the previous one. To her credit, he was only forced to interject and point out her mistakes 3 times, and soon she showed improvement, causing her mounting frustration to ebb away. As he was picking up the pace, Cynthia spoke up. "Wyatt, if I may know, have you picked a name for your squadron yet? For that matter, have you picked your squad mates?" "To be entirely honest, I haven't decided on a name yet. Selecting my squad mates is another issue entirely. The information surveys—" "Dossiers," Clara corrected. "Right. The dossiers on the pilots are substantial. I haven't read them all, but I already picked the old members of Epsilon to be my squad mates," Wyatt answered. "Don't lose track of your index fingers, Cynthia. Go down, cross the stream, pull up, twist, and repeat from the other side," he instructed softly. "So the problem is the 5th member," Cynthia continued, nonchalantly obeying his command. "I'll be responsible for their lives out there. I can't just pick anyone at random," Wyatt replied. "The last thing I want is a repeat of what glory-seeking fool of a Bacchus Reed caused. At least with Nultar, Gregor, and Leopold, I have seen what they can do during a battle. Granted, it's just one battle, but that's more than what a mere dossier can tell me." He let out a mirthless chuckle. "It's frustrating, confusing, and annoying." "Welcome to the world of command, Wyatt. That's why I prefer obeying orders over giving them," said the blue-haired woman with an understanding tone. "My words may not be of much value, but if your performance against the Drazen was any indication, then command may suit you." "Well, at least one of us has confidence in me not screwing up," Wyatt thought before replying with a dry, "Perhaps. That reminds me. Wyatt, have you given any thought to your heraldic shield design?" Cynthia asked. "Oh, shit, I totally forgot all about that." Wyatt put on his best nonchalant expression before answering. "I haven't had much time to think about it, Cynthia. Commander Redford gave me this task yesterday, and I have yet to finish it. Regardless, I fail to see the value of a heraldic shield. What am I to do with it?" Before Cynthia could reply, Clara froze, and her 2 companions turned to see her and watched as her expression darkened. "My brother sent me a message. The traitor Frederick Anderson is dead," Clara said, her voice as cold as a glacier's. "Exalted virtue, command bridge." "How is this possible?" the prince asked as Juliana and Lukacs stood a few steps behind him. "We're investigating, my prince," Lukacs replied, "but I'm afraid that we will find nothing. No transmissions were detected, no stealth fields were uncovered, and the footage remains unaltered." "Could it be possible that Frederick had a martyr device implanted within himself?" the prince asked, his eyes closed. As much as he proclaimed that the army was the only true branch of the military that knew what honor is, he hardly made an example of it. I doubt that Frederick Anderson, arrogant and self-serving as he was, would willingly sacrifice himself for a greater cause. My Royal Marines reported that Frederick was agitated moments before his death. I'm certain he was murdered. His secrets silenced and knowledge lost, my prince, Juliana added, her eyes narrowed and burning with righteous fury. "Can nothing at all be recovered?" the prince asked. "His cerebral implants went haywire. His augmentations spiraled out of control in a way that destroyed them completely. His brain was liquefied inside his cranium, my liege," Lukacs explained. "There's nothing that can be retrieved. How this was done, I know not. It is the first time I've heard of such an execution method. It can't be easy to do, or whoever killed Frederick would have killed us before. There had to be certain conditions for this to be possible," Juliana reasoned. "What are your orders, my prince?" "Conceal this information. If news about Frederick's death reaches his house, then it may push them to side with Duke Draymore. Patrick Anderson will not be happy, and he will surely demand answers. Freeze his body. At the very least, we shall return his corpse to his family," the prince ordered. "Send Milcades to the Noir Navio. His services are no longer required here." "As you command, my prince," Lukacs replied. "Admiral, how long until we reach Macha?" the prince asked. "2 more jumps, your majesty," Damien replied from his seat. "The reports from Redford indicate what we suspected. Finnegan forces are focused on their borders and entry points. We have been largely undetected, and reports indicate that our arrival at the Felicity system will go without further delays. Our warp signatures have been picked up by patrol and civilian-grade ships, but they have avoided contacting us so far. Communication silence protocols are in effect and have proven effective. The aged admiral paused for a moment before continuing. I can only conclude that the Caiston traders and the Third Fleet renegades have no more of those black ships at their current disposal. More likely, they're preserving their strength for the battles to come. That or they are busy skirmishing against Finnegan forces, Juliana added. My prince, if I may, aren't we being too paranoid? We're in friendly territory. You should announce your presence so that Amelia knows you are close. I'd rather be labeled as paranoid over losing more ships and lives in a surprise assault, the prince replied. Lukacs, any further developments regarding the captured black ship? Nothing new to report, my prince. Our engineers and technical specialists are certain they can effectively reverse engineer most of the ship's systems and technologies. They won't be perfect recreations, but any gunship, frigate, and corvette-class ships will be able to be retrofitted and upgraded, once they are done performing their investigations and running tests in a safe environment, Lukacs summarized. Lady Cynthia should be proud. Thanks to her efforts, the Principality may gain new technologies and become stronger once the Draymore menace is dealt with. House Winfield will be honored further as it should be. Your candid praise is welcomed, Lukacs. Save it for when it truly matters. House Ishtal depends on you to correct it. Focus on that first, Juliana replied with a serious but supportive tone. In return, Lukacs nodded as the two commanders exchanged a solemn glance. The arrogant Caistons gifted us invaluable prizes, the prince agreed. They have cost my uncle dearly, a powerful destroyer-class ship that is equivalent to the exalted virtue itself in terms of firepower and surpasses it in almost every other regard. Most importantly, the secrets of these black ships will be a boon to us. He may have the advantage, but it will be a temporary one. He finally opened his violet eyes and turned to face his two present commanders with an intense fire reflected on them. He will be stopped, his coup will crumble, his conspirators punished, and he shall be reminded of the weight of the words he has betrayed. For loyalty is its own reward.
Camrim, Third Moon's orbital station. Duke Cornelius Draymore sat at the head of a large table as he silently observed the other members present. At his right side sat his daughter, Veronica, wearing her green suit of armor, proudly bearing the crest of their family. Her neck-long blonde hair was braided behind her. She was nearly as tall as he was, barely passing the 2-meter mark without her armor, and her intense green eyes shined with devotion and purpose. On the table sat several other figures, the heads or the direct representatives of the houses, both great and those minor houses strong enough to warrant enough independence to be of consideration, sat patiently for him to start their meeting. Some seats were empty, replaced by a monitor showcasing a representative from a house too far away to attend the meeting even through a dignitary. The most prominent houses present were House Ishtal, represented by Maurice Ishtal, their current head, House Tygan, represented by Hadrian Tygan, House Centaur, represented by their heiress apparent Felicity Centaur, House Wunder, represented by the head's brother and advisor Rodrigo Wunder, and of course, his most loyal vassal, House Caiston, represented by Tamarin Caiston himself. The latter was a rather unexpected surprise, given that the gray-haired, tough-looking man rarely left his throne. Even during the secret and delicate years leading to his coup, Cornelius could count with the fingers of one hand the times he'd talked to Tamirin in person. The man, despite approaching 80 years of age, was in good health and showcased a savvy, quick mind. Just how much have you spent on cyto-rejuvenation treatments? Cornelius asked himself as Hadrian and Tamirin, both marquises, shot glares at each other. It was no secret that their houses were ancient rivals, but now that House Tygan had sided with him, they were forced to tolerate each other, at least in his presence. "We've waited long enough," the Duke announced, breaking the silence. "Let the reunion begin." Veronica followed suit without missing a beat. "His Regal Majesty, Lord Regent Cornelius Draymore is present. Everyone bow your heads," she commanded fiercely and with intense conviction. As was tradition, every noble present straightened up and bowed their heads respectfully, officially acknowledging the Duke as their superior, awaiting his orders to proceed. "I thank you all for attending my call, those present and far away," he began with a soft, diplomatic tone. All the present rose their heads and turned their attention to him. "I will be blunt and avoid spouting flowery prose. I am Lord Regent in name only. The Council of Nobles is divided, and until the prince is captured or slain, no further decisions can be made official. Do not be arrogant, my friends. The prince may not be beholden to his full authority and power, but he is still the prince. We must proceed carefully. My Lord Regent," the stunningly beautiful and ebony-skinned Felicity Sinter spoke up, as honey-colored eyes looked at him with both respect and wonder. "I speak in my mother's voice when I ask the following. Why must we stay our hands at this moment? The false prince must not be allowed to gather his forces. Should we not strike at the idiots loyal to his unjust rule and remove them?" "I will not tolerate unwarranted insults, Sintor," the Duke warned, his voice dropping a few octaves as he did so. He took a moment to inhale deeply before continuing. "The prince is unsuited to be so, this is true. I was the first to move against him. But he is still my nephew. Hold your tongue if you wish to remain in my good graces." "Of course, my Lord Regent. My mistake shall not be repeated," Felicity replied, her voice never reflecting the shudder of nervousness that coursed through her body. She turned to Veronica and barely managed to suppress another shudder when she noticed the murderous glare she was giving her. Cornelius noticed the exchange and placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, calming her down. "As for your question, I answer as such. This is not a civil war, nor will I allow it to devolve into such a conflict. This is a struggle between houses, a dispute of succession, nothing more. The prince is to be removed from his position through one means or another, but not through outright war." "A most commendable goal, my Lord Regent," Tamarin fawned, his voice solid and flattering. "However, I must ask, can such a thing be prevented? The Winfields and House Valto are currently locked in their own territories, this is true, and without the full might of their forces we stand the upper hand. But House Finnegan is another matter. My house forces and those of the Third Fleet under the wise leadership of Fleet Admiral Tigan have made lackluster gains so far as I'm aware." Cornelius groaned internally after hearing the devious words of his most loyal vassal. Thankfully for him, it was Veronica who made her voice known next. Marquis Tamarin Caiston, you speak as if you know something that we do not," Veronica said, eyes narrowing. Tamarin's expression fell and was replaced by one of shame, and he shook his head slowly a few times before replying. "It shames me and my house to speak of the following blunder, but it must be said." Now that caught Cornelius's attention. A quick glance with Hadrian and Maurice confirmed that they knew not what Tamarin was speaking of. "Proceed," he allowed. "It is with great shame and humility that I must inform you, your lordship, that my beloved nephew, Viscount Samuel Caiston, acted on his own accord," Tamarin began with masterfully honed prose. "At Gintrax, he decided to engage the prince's fleet with his forces. Another relative of mine died, Baron Lenaro Caiston, in that battle, losing the battlecruiser, the rightful path with all hands alongside its small support escorts." He stopped for a moment, struggling to continue. "Out with it!" Hadrian demanded with a stern, impatient tone. Tamarin, slightly quivering, turned to the Duke and found his voice once more. "My Lord Regent, my brave, valiant, but misguided and irrational nephew has cost us dearly. Due to his actions and commands, we lost 10 Corvus frigates, the cruiser Longstride to perfection and his personal flagship, the assault destroyer Samuel's Glory in the battle against the prince, causing significant— "He lost what?" interrupted Hadrian, as everyone else but the Duke and his daughter devolved into a fit of accusations and murmurs. Your nephew lost 12 of the ships his lordship so graciously bestowed upon you, Tamarin? Why was he in command of such a large portion of your stealth forces? And why has my brother not informed me of this yet?" Tamarin glared at Hadrian for a moment before responding. "Before I was so rudely interrupted by the demented wailing of an oafish buffoon. I was about to explain that, Hadrian." He paused to clear his throat, then continued. "Samuel's actions caused numerous casualties across his fleet, nearly crippling it entirely. However, their survival allowed them to hunt the informants and agents in their midst. The QEC was lost and used as a lure to distract the prince and his followers. Nothing more is known. It is possible that Frederick Anderson was captured and quite possibly executed. Preposterous! Not even the pretender prince would dare. What more proof do we need that he is unfit? He seeks war. Nothing is certain yet. We must first verify this. Jumping to conclusions blindly will do us no favors. Not acting is a worse option. While the room fell into chaos, Cornelius leaned back on his seat while Veronica stood ready to obey any command he could give her. After a minute of letting his conspirators and allies steadily increase the volume of their discussions, he made his presence known once more. Silence was his command, and everything came to a halt. I shall deal with that problem later and in private, Tamarin. Rodrigo, how are your house's efforts against the Calons performing? We have successfully put them in a stalemate, my Lord Regent. Rodrigo, a handsome, mature man with black hair, yellow eyes, and a striking black beard, replied, his voice deep and booming. Elements from the 8th, 1st, 4th, and 7th Fleet have taken refuge within their territories, and we've received reports that at least a dozen of their worlds are experiencing revolts after our agents successfully herded commoners to cry out in your favor, your lordship. Similar success has been found on Valto territories, my Lord Regent. In fact, several lesser and a few insignificant minor houses have declared themselves in your favor, with a vast majority retaining neutrality. Only their most fervent and loyal vassals and banner leaders have sided with House Valto. In void combat, we've found some ships belonging to the renegade fleets, and we've kept them from gaining strength. The capture of the battlecruiser Purest Excellence was successful 2 days prior. House Centaur's guile and loyalty, Lord Regent, are at your service. You may expect nothing more than further success from us, my liege, Felicity boasted with a sultry, coquettish smile. Cornelius ignored her vulgar attempt at seduction and carried on with what truly mattered. What about House Winfield? He asked, though he already knew the answer to that one. Our infiltration attempts have been less than ideal, but we've managed to detect a rather alarming concentration of renegade Royal Navy ships across the systems we could enter without losing our probes or risking our stealth ships in pointless combat, Hadrian said, venomously glaring at Tamirin, who returned the glare in kind. Most alarmingly, we've detected 3 battleship signatures, but failed to identify them by name. Assaults across their border territories are ongoing, and while we are slowing them down, they are slowly consolidating their forces. If Leona and Benjamin Winfield manage to gather significant enough forces, their retaliatory strike could be devastating. Focus your efforts on House Winfield. We cannot allow them to come to my nephew's aid, the Duke declared. Are the academies in full operation across your territories? Everyone agreed shortly after. Good. I must reiterate that none of you dare to recruit directly from the academy. Recall your sons and daughters if you must, call upon your bannermen and banner leaders, and rely on your knights, but leave the academies alone. He paused for a moment to let the weight of his words sink in. Do not conscript any commoner forces or civilian ships. Hire mercenaries, make deals, and trade for more ships if you need them. It is imperative that we do not break with tradition. If we do so, then our position will be severely weakened. My nephew knows this, and I will not be the one to break it. We must not allow this conflict to escalate and spiral out of our control, Cornelius stated firmly, his baritone voice drilling into the heads of everyone present, physically or not. We understand, my liege. Your desires and vision shall be followed and obeyed to the letter, Hadrian replied solemnly. My liege, if I may, what are we to do about the commoner filth that dare protest against you? Rodrigo asked cautiously. Many protests have been quelled, but as news spread across the principality, many houses may be pressured into siding with the pretender prince if the rabble's voices get too loud. Cornelius gave everyone a short-lived glance before replying, his posture firm and his voice eloquent. They are your subjects to deal with. Suppress them. However, I will not tolerate excessive abuse to be employed. Use propaganda, lie to them, enforce military power, use martial law, and give them bread and games. Use whatever tactic and method you can think of to appease them into either submission or silence. Only act with force, precise, surgical force, if you must deal with possible rebel groups or revolutionaries. Do not forget that nobility leads, commoners obey. Remind them of this fact without staining your hands in their blood, unless it is inevitable to do so. None dare defy his command. The following hour went by in a blur, as talks regarding economic production and trade issues were brought up, how their stockpile and warehouses were ready and full in anticipation of the coup. Personal disputes were held, and plans to gain more support from neutral houses were laid out without using coercion, gunboat diplomacy, or blackmail. When the meeting ended, everyone left or disconnected except for Tamirin, Hadrian, Felicity, Rodrigo, and Maurice. Alone in the room, the Duke stood up to his full height and turned to Tamirin, his expression unreadable. "Explain. Now." Tamirin bowed his head before replying. "My nephew. He attacked the prince's fleet and, in his hubris, made use of your generously gifted stealth ships to try and end him in one fell swoop. The battle wasn't planned. Not entirely. Lenaro arrived a day prior thanks to the information Frederick Anderson gave us. But due to Finnegan forces and Drazen raiders, they were unable to send more ships to intercept the prince." He paused for a moment to swallow a ball of spit that had formed in his mouth. "Frederick used the QEC in a ploy to throw off his pursuers, and we lost contact after that. My agent will be unable to contact me until a safe haven is found, my Lord Regent. But from what little information I was able to receive, it all indicates that Frederick Anderson was deceived, captured, and most likely executed for his treason." "Why was my brother not informed by your agent, Caiston?" Hadrian countered immediately. Tamirin raised a hand defensively. "Your brother was nothing more than a middleman. You do well to remember, Tegan, that it was I who convinced Frederick to join our cause in the first place. It is shameful that he died, but he gave his life for his Lord Regent, as have two of my blood so far." "You arrogant, sniveling," Hadrian began, but a loud hit against the table cut him off. "You tire my Lord Father with your inconsequential disputes and petty rivalries, Hadrian." "Tamirin, why did you not inform your Lord Regent sooner?" Veronica asked, glaring at the man. "I learned of this development myself shortly before the meeting started, Lady Veronica. This is new to me too. I was under the impression that the Corvus frigates were somewhere else. I do not know what possessed my nephew to act so recklessly, I must confess," Tamirin replied. "Only a fool would take what Tamirin says at face value. A warrior he is not, but his tongue is as deadly as any blade," Cornelius thought before opening his mouth. "The loss of those ships is regrettable, and put a further strain on the Third Fleet's operational capabilities against Finnegan forces. The cruiser and the destroyer, though, those are heftier losses that I can't ignore." His gaze focused on Tamirin. "Will your remaining forces suffice?" "My son Andrew has taken full command and will make them count, your lordship. House Caiston won't let you down again, my liege," Tamirin replied, bowing his head deeply in reverence and submission. The Duke ignored the head of House Caiston and turned to Maurice Ishtal. The man was nearly identical to Lukács, sharing a strong jawline, smooth skin, and blonde silvery hair. But his hair was neck-length, whereas Lukács's was shorter. "Maurice, has my brother Oscar replied to my request?" "He has, my liege. As per your instructions, I shall give it to you now." Maurice cleared his throat and spoke. His Majesty Duke Oscar Ionati of Vault replies, "No." He stopped and sighed tiredly. "Nothing else follows." "Traitor," Veronica hissed. "Why?" Cornelius asked softly as he turned his gaze to his daughter. "Your uncle owes me no allegiance, and I owe him none. I merely asked if he'd recognize me as Lord Regent. His answer is both deserved and predictable, but I still had to try. Every man is beholden to their choices and convictions, my dear Veronica. After all, I am a traitor to many with just reason. Fools, ignorant fools that do not see the magnificence of your rulership, father," Veronica cried back, her face showing distress. "Gabriel is a traitor, as is anyone who can't see your power and strength. Do not resent your brother for his decision to stand against me, Veronica. Love your brother. Forgive him, understand him, and you shall stand above his clouded vision," he said, gently caressing the cheek of his daughter with a finger before turning to Felicity, his expression firm and resolute once more. "Felicity, has House Centaur done as I asked?" Felicity nodded. "It has begun, my liege. The news is spreading across the Principality with haste, and soon every system, station, planet, and outpost shall know the reason for the recent disturbances across every territory. Our economy shall remain strong and stable, our strength shall be seen, and soon more will flock to pay tribute to you, our Lord Regent." The Duke nodded, pleased. "Rodrigo, how are communications holding across the Principality?" "Strong and reliable, despite the noticeable lack of detected military lines. The FLT network buoys are in place, and localized communications vary from system to system and territory to territory. However, unless we privatize and take over the entirety of the network, we won't be able to control it in the long run," Rodrigo replied, his tone neutral and direct. "Or risk the ire of my sister, Duchess Sylvia Emerald. The fact that she refuses to take any side at all is a victory for us and our cause. Keep an eye on communications. Plant bugs. Send ghost AIs. Do whatever you have to do to interfere and intercept Aster communications, but never attempt to take control of any buoy, or worse, take it down," the Duke warned. "My nephew is cunning, and with Clara at his side, doubly so. They won't reveal themselves until they are safe within Finnegan territory." "What of Princes Alexander and Giovanni, my liege?" Hadrian asked, concerned. "My nephews will show themselves, there is no doubt about it. By chance and careful planning on your part, Tamarin." The aged man smiled at the praise. "We know where the Prince and Princess Clara are, and where are they headed. Fret not, for I've already taken into account many a possibility. For now, we must focus on weakening the forces loyal to the Prince and rallying more houses under our banner." "My liege, what about the Royal Marines?" Hadrian asked tentatively. "They will never join our cause, and over 50 are protecting the false prince." "What about them?" Cornelius asked dismissingly. "The vast majority of them are trapped within House Aster territory, with most of them planet-bound on Astordia itself. They are fierce and dangerous, this is true. But if they can't reach us, they are a non-factor. My forces are in control of every shipyard, anchorage, station, and important world in Aster territory. The capabilities of the prince are limited, and we will chip at him until he is captured, removed, or forced to recognize me as regent officially. Our victory is assured. Strong is the hammer of Draymore. Loyalty shall be its own reward." "Strong is the hammer of Draymore," everyone chanted after the Duke.
Nor navio. Redford stared at his monitor for several moments before looking up at a nervous Wyatt Staples, then back at his monitor before crossing his arms. "Is this what you'd consider a joke, Wyatt?" Wyatt blinked in confusion. "No? Is something the matter, Commander?" Redford kept a firm gaze on Wyatt for several seconds before sighing in frustration and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Wyatt, to an extent I can understand why you'd choose such a name for your squadron. But this," he said, turning his monitor around to show Wyatt what was on screen. "I will not allow this travesty to be your heraldic shield, Lieutenant." What's wrong with it? Wyatt thought as he observed his design. After the news Clara had delivered, thoroughly destroying the day of relaxation she had been looking forward to, she dismissed him, letting him return to his duties. He read the remaining dossiers, and after careful consideration, he chose his 5th squadmate, chose a fitting name for his squadron, and finally spent hours designing his heraldic shield before going to sleep. As his morning started, and before he had to go to the gym area to begin his exercises in preparation for his torture session disguised as training, he went to Redford to present his choices to him. His commander had approved of his 5th member, a skilled but problematic lesser noble by the name of Raquel Otillo. Excellent grades and outstanding scores, but with a fierce, competitive attitude that often led her to come to blows with other nobles who snubbed her. He had even begrudgingly accepted the name he'd chosen for his squadron, Composters, in honor of what he'd been sent to do, and as a subtle reminder to himself of what he was despite his ennoblement. Ennoblement? I'm a knight banneret of House Aster. I'm a noble. I'm a bloody blue blood now. My parents and brothers aren't going to believe me when I tell them, Wyatt thought before turning his attention back to his commanding officer. "Commander, I don't understand what I did wrong. Of course you didn't, Redford replied, sounding almost exasperated. Listen to what I'm about to say, Wyatt. Even if you weren't a knight banneret at the service of House Astor and under the direct orders of her ladyship, Princess Clara, this, he tapped the monitor with a finger, would not be acceptable in any measure. This, Wyatt, is an abomination. That you've chosen the name Composters for your squadron has drained any hope I had left in me that your naming conventions were a mere fluke. But now that I've seen this thing, I can only blame your ignorance. Wyatt remained silent, taking in everything Commander Redford Kalin was saying. His eyes moved to the screen once more and really focused on his heraldic shield, trying to find the source of Redford's disgust. There was a regular garbage hauler in the center of the simple heater shield he'd pick. The background was black, with several tiny white dots representing the stars in the night sky. On the top, a series of vines set ablaze could be found, running down the edges and cascading into burning engines, while beneath the hauler a dozen smaller fighters flew in random directions. Honestly, what's wrong with it? He asked himself again, failing to see anything that could offend the commander to such an extent. Turning his gaze back to Redford, his confusion only mounted. Your heraldic shield is a disgrace. I'm not saying this because you've broken a rule or because it is offensive, Wyatt, Redford began. To put it in terms you'll understand, it is simply too loud. Too loud? Wyatt asked, confused. There's too much in it. Nothing is stopping you or anyone from making a heraldic shield such as this one. In fact, several rising houses throughout history have started their stories making this same mistake, Wyatt. In your case, it is mere ignorance and a desire to cram as much of your values and what you hold dear in a single picture. Those words caused Wyatt's eyes to open widely, and his mind wandered back to his painting afternoons with Mr. Warlow. The old man loved to rant, but he was a good painter, and he happily taught him whenever he had time to come and visit him. He once had said something similar about a painting he was doing, mentioning that he'd put too much on it and that it lost all meaning because of it. Just because I know what all of that means doesn't mean others will... Redford nodded. Precisely. Many have made this mistake, thinking it would make them stand out from their peers. In truth, all these earn is ridicule. And for you, Lieutenant Wyatt Staples, this is far more important, for you will not showcase yourself and your nascent house, but you are to represent your princess and House Astor as a whole. Your deeds will reflect upon the honor, renown, and name of House Astor, and directly on that of Princess Clara. As such, your heraldic shield must be simple and easy to recognize and showcase your greatest features, a promise, your motto, or your greatest virtue. Redford's eyes flashed for a fraction of a second, and the screen shifted to showcase a type of shield that he vaguely recognized as a scutum. The background was red with a gold trim. There were 2 white strings or some sort of parchment, he wasn't sure, with the words "Ever Vigilant," "Ever Faithful" etched into them in golden letters. In the center of the shield itself, a black bird of some sort was on display with its wings open and 3 silver stars above it. This is my heraldic shield and the symbol of House Kalin at large. My ancestor designed it when he was elevated to nobility. At the time, it was a mere raven, standing instead of flying, with a single star and nothing more to show for it. As he and his descendants earned more accolades and achievements, the heraldic shield slowly changed into what it is today and what House Kalin represents. Do you understand, Wyatt? A heraldic shield is no small matter, less so for a man in your position. You must represent your benefactors, yourself, and the future generations of your house with dignity and pride from the start. I believe I understand, Commander, Wyatt replied. Truthfully, that was a half-lie. He understood the importance of it, but the weight of something he'd thought was simple and insignificant was only now crashing on him. It disturbed him to the core that something so meaningless to him could be so important now that Redford explained it to him in more detail. I don't care about my dignity or pride or honor, but I will not insult Clara either, he decided at that moment. Commander, how am I to make a good heraldic shield? Noble tradition prevents me from guiding your hand, for it is something you must decide yourself. But what I can do, I've already done. Reflect on my words, Wyatt Staples, and inform yourself. Investigate. Search within yourself. What do you wish everyone to know upon looking at your heraldic shield? What values do you want it to reflect? Redford asked in a serious but kind tone, his words filled with the wisdom of a man that, for a moment, reminded Wyatt of his father. What values indeed? Wyatt thought, and he pondered it deeply. For now, Wyatt, think on it. I'll give you until we reach Matcha to design a proper heraldic shield. I've informed Cynthia that you will be joining her later today. For now, report to the training chambers and practice with your newly formed squadron. Get to know each other better and refine yourselves. You can then decide if you wish to switch out members. The first rule any officer in a commanding position must learn is that the members of a squadron must work well together, or else disputes will arise and your performance will suffer because of it. Dismissed, Redford said, and turned his monitor back at him. Wyatt gave a salute and turned to leave. Being a noble is going to be more complicated than I thought. So much for considering desertion at this point, I guess.